Jack, I've got a funny story for you from my weekend.
Always good.
So I was at the in-laws, and do you know what the mother-in-law said to me? Her exact words. She said, "You look like you filled out, David." Filled out? What kind of thing is that to say?
It's up there with "you're looking well," isn't it? I often get that.
Yeah. I didn't know what to say. And as we were leaving as well, she turned around to me and she says, "Oh, are you?" She went, "Oh, do you want a Pimm's?" And I said, "No, I've got to drive later, Jackie. I can't do that." And she went, "Oh, make one for me and Lois then."
Oh, shall we have a cup of tea? Oh, yeah. Just looks at me. I'll make a cup of tea for everyone then, shall I?
Maybe this is how we should extend this podcast. This can be about economics, but we could also we could be agony uncles.
Send us your problems, agonomics@ahdb.org.uk.
Exactly. Economic problems or anything else.
Mother-in-law management.
We're there for you.
Hello and welcome to Agonomics with David and Jack. I'm Jack Watts.
And I'm David Udall, back again to explore the economics world and its role in agriculture.
Today we're talking to Farm Bench Manager Laura Smith and Senior Analyst Olivia Bonza about Agri-benchmark.
That's what Agri-benchmark is and how it works.
And how it applies to you.
We'll also be talking about how AHDB contributes to it.
And let you know about upcoming work to look out for.
Please follow or subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss an episode.
New shows drop every Wednesday at midday, and please get in touch.
You can comment on any of AHDB's social channels
or email us agonomics@ahdb.org.uk.
And of course, we have a mystery word for each of us, or mystery phrase or thing that has no right to be in a podcast about agriculture or economics that we have to slip in somewhere. If you can spot them, as ever, you're doing better than me.
I would like to point out that last time I did guess your mystery word.
I don't think we're keeping score, Jack.
I think we should.
Only because you're 1-0 up, yeah.
So this week, we are talking about Agri-benchmark and indeed what it is. In my view, it's a bit of a hidden gem of the industry and the work that we do. And it's all about looking at our industry and how it works and compares versus key competitors around the world. We talked a few weeks ago about Farm Bench, and the way to think about Agri-benchmark is kind of Farm Bench, probably on a global scale, which can be quite exciting, probably a little bit nerdy, but really important to sort of understanding where we sit in the global context and how competitive we are and what areas we need to think about to improve our competitiveness. I've probably exhausted all my knowledge of it, so we're grateful today to have Laura Smith, who works in our Farm Bench team, and Olivia Bonza, who works in our Cereals and Oilseeds analyst team as well. Welcome both. So Laura, coming to you first, but could you just walk us through what Agri-benchmark is and how it works?
Yeah, definitely. So Agri-benchmark is a program put together and run by the Tunen Institute in Germany. It covers a few different sectors, but the sector that Olivia and I cover is cash crops. So that includes cereals and oilseeds from the UK. It's a really big program bringing together lots of different crops from different countries around the world. I think there are about 35 to 40 major crop producers taking part each year. So each country inputs some data based on typical crop producing farms in the UK. The Institute makes sure everyone's comparable, works with everyone to get it in to certain deadlines, so then we can all come together and compare how our crops have been performing over the last year. So it's a really exciting opportunity to get together with other countries and have some really good comparisons.
Having the ability to deep dive into that data, not just for one harvest year, but for a long term is really wonderful. Olivia, how do we contribute? Laura talked about sort of typical farms. What do our typical farms look like from a UK context, and how do we then feed that into Agri-benchmark?
Yeah, so each year we input 3 farms into the global database. So we have a farm in Scotland, a farm in Suffolk, and a farm in Cambridgeshire. And it's, as Laura mentioned, they're supposed to be typical farms. So we try and include a variety of rotations, so lots of different crops within there, We also have typical production systems. So that includes kind of no-till, min-till, and conventional methods as well. And basically just a representation of each of those areas. So in Scotland, for example, we probably have more sort of barley or oats. And then obviously in the eastern regions, it's more kind of wheat, barley again. Also, we have some potatoes in there as well. So quite a variation in terms of what we input, but we try and make it as typical to the UK as we can. And the farm sizes vary from about 270 hectares to 810 hectares. So quite a wide range of farms in there, but I think it probably represents a typical UK farm quite well, and that enables us to compare ourselves to other farms around the world as well.
And I guess that's no mean feat, isn't it? Trying to there's such even within our cereals and oilseed sector, there's such a diversity of farm type, farm size, rotation. So that's no mean feat. And I think people might be thinking, well, that doesn't represent my farm. I think the important thing is actually it's looking at those longer term trends, isn't it, and how our performance using those typical farms changes over time, because I think that's really quite indicative of the value of the project, is understanding how performance is changing and those areas that we need to be improving on versus competitors.
Yeah, we've spoken previously, Jack, haven't we, about farm bench and the ability of individual farms to benchmark against one another and the learnings that provides. But this is obviously kind of like, supersized in its scale. And that's the bit that I think is interesting about this when you put it into the context of the industry at large and kind of gathering knowledge and information. And sometimes we can be very kind of, domestic centric and focused on everything that we're doing. And actually, there's a huge amount that we can learn from the rest of the farming community around the world and put that into practice. And I guess that's where we as AHDB come in, is about linking all of that together and being able to communicate some of those kind of global aspects. And I would hope for a few of our levy payers, it sort of sparks an interest of going, well, I wonder why that is. And it starts that sort of like discovery to then understand bits and pieces and potentially try new things as well. But it's just that knowledge sharing ultimately that's at the heart of it, isn't it? And we do produce quite a lot of analysis, don't we, Laura, in terms of the work that this comes out. So this isn't just about numbers, etc. We also put some effort into explaining what it means.
Yeah, definitely. So we sort of wait, and then all the data is checked through, and once it's all been checked and approved, it's put into a big database. So after we received that database last year, Olivia and I had a good project working through and pulling together some really useful information out based on Harvest 22 at the time. So we had a good look at the input costs, overheads, prices, and eventually the margins, which were impacting different wheat producers around the world. So it was really interesting to get to be able to compare how the UK crop is performing compared to some of the really big competitors around the globe. It was just nice to have those numbers there and something to really pick apart how certain systems are performing compared to ours.
The data is really powerful. And Olivia, I wonder if you could tell us sort of, where do we do really well versus our competitors, and where do we have room for improvement?
Generally, the probably key takeaway from those Harvest 22 results was that we do sort of score quite highly in terms of costs. So input costs and overheads, we are quite high up on a global level, especially in terms of sort of fertilizer, crop protection. We tend to spend quite a lot per hectare on these things. However, we're also a very high output system globally. So we were sort of high, especially in wheat, we were highest yielding in Harvest 22. And as a result of that, actually, in pounds per tonne, our costings come down a lot relative to other countries. So we're definitely a high input but high output country. And I think that was probably the sort of key message of the data from 2022, and also the average and trend over the previous years as well.
It was really interesting when we looked at the data at the end. On a per hectare basis, we were sort of twice as expensive as the US to grow a hectare of wheat. But as Olivia says, when we diluted that on a per tonne basis, we were really comparable to the US crop. So for the UK systems, it really seems to be all about big yields and that really making us a really efficient country.
It's always astounded me. The UK average wheat yield used to be sort of just over 8 tonnes a hectare. when I was heavily involved in it. And then from a global point of view, the global average was just over 3. And so that kind of is quite stark in terms of our yield progress, and I suppose you call it land use efficiency. So our ability to generate crop yield from an area of land is really important. I guess that's a link to the fact that we're not moisture short, we're not moisture deficit on the whole, and certainly not this growing season, whereas that's normally the biggest constraint from a global point of view.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key comparisons that's interesting from my perspective, is how those figures fit in on a global scale, and especially over time, and looking at some of those longer term historical changes. I think this is where the value of what we have now is really interesting, because obviously, like you said, Jack, we can have those individual seasons where we see these anomalies. But actually, if you think of the way that farming has been through a transition with regards to direct subsidies over the last few years, and obviously continuing until 2027 of being phased out in England, it'll be interesting to see how that data changes on a farming business, of if there is an impact of how we sit versus other countries, if things such as SFI come in on a grander scale and impact some of the potential productivity and working through it. So this is one of those things whereby it may not be giving you a huge eureka moment every year, but having that historical context and knowing that we'll have it in the future to then kind of look back on, I think that's the really valuable thing. It's kind of almost like a bit of an evaluation tool, isn't it, to kind of see where we've been and then learn from it and move on. We're going to take a short break here to hear the latest market updates. But when we come back, we're going to be talking more about Agri-benchmark, having a wider discussion sort of where it fits with the world, and looking to upcoming analysis as well.
If you're in the market for another podcast to subscribe to, then look no further than our Manager's Special, AHDB's Food and Farming podcast. Recent episodes include a consumer insight offering on red meat labels and supermarket aisles, as well as a dairy special about our work with retailers to promote milk. If you're after herbs, or rather herbal lays, our shelves are stacked with sage advice on how to introduce lucerne and clover into your fields. In fact, we cater for all tastes, so you'll find sections dedicated to all sectors: pork, cereals and oilseeds, dairy, and beef and lamb. And don't forget our middle aisle, where you can often pick up a bargain episode you didn't know you needed to listen to. Search Food and Farming wherever you get your podcasts. AHDB thanks you for your custom.
Hi, I'm Olivia Bonser, Senior Analyst at HDB, with a look at grain and oilseed markets for the week commencing the 6th of January. Despite some support in wheat markets over the Christmas period, prices have been under pressure in the new year from a strengthening US dollar, technical selling and sluggish global demand. However, Russian wheat crop conditions remain in focus, with warmer than usual temperatures and excess moisture in key growing regions. Persistent hot and dry weather in Argentina is also raising concern over the country's maize crop, which is now in its critical development stage. For rapeseed, new crop prices are supported, with doubts over prospects for global rapeseed production in 2025, though forecasts of heavy soybean supplies from South America limit any major price increases. Over the next few weeks, weather in major exporting countries such as South America and Russia will be key in driving prices. The USDA will also release updated global supply and demand estimates at the end of this week. To stay up to date with the latest data and analysis across arable, red meat, and dairy markets, head to hdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
Welcome back to Agonomics with David and Jack. This week, we are lucky to be joined by Laura Smith from our Farm Bench team and Olivia Bonser from our arable team. And we're talking about Agri-benchmark, international benchmarking, how the UK is involved with that and what we do. And I suppose now kind of getting into a little bit more of the detail of that is every year there's a convening of the Agri-benchmark network by sector in the form of a conference. And I wonder, Olivia, if you could sort of talk us through sort of what happens at these things and how do we get stuff out of it?
So every year, the contributors to the global database all gather together at the conference, and we kind of discuss the data that we've input, and the Agri-benchmark team have had time to sort of process the data and look for any specific standouts in the data that need to be discussed at the conference. It's also a good opportunity to ask individual countries about their data, and some of the contributors will give presentations. So, for example, Laura and I spoke a little bit about the Sustainable Farming Incentive, as it's something that's very unique to the UK. And I think especially the other European countries were really interested in that because they're sort of developing their environmental policies as well. And we also hear from sort of other countries around the world. So, for example, in South America, we heard a bit about deforestation, which could have quite a direct impact on us. For example, looking at sustainable soy and how we're going to source that moving forward. It's a very topical area of discussion. And also, from my point of view on the market side, there was some good talks about sort of soybean crush and soybean use in renewable diesel in America and how that could impact sort of global supply and demand moving forward as well. So it's a real all-rounder conference. We cover a lot of different topics there. But I guess the key thing is to discuss the data and to discuss what might impact the data moving forward as well, and also how we can expand the data moving forward and some different parameters that we might be able to measure.
It's really interesting. I think, so we'll talk about soybeans. I think it's always fascinated me how there are two increasingly important crops in the world that we don't really grow in the UK, but having a bigger and bigger impact on the economics of crop production in the UK. And soybeans and maize are those two crops as well. Really, we've seen the advent of GM in those crops, we've seen the growth in demand, both because the world wants to consume more livestock products, but also because of the linkage into usage of those crops in renewable fuels as well. And every year, those two crops become more and more influential on the global crop markets and more influential on how things work in the UK. And it's always a bit of a struggle to kind of comprehend how on earth do these crops have such a big impact when we don't really produce them in any huge quantities. But it just comes back to that commodity nature of these markets and substitution between different crops, particularly into animal feed and to biofuel markets as well. And it's always seemed a little bit challenging to understand, but really important dynamic nonetheless.
No, you're right, Jack. Those two are definitely the sort of the top two, the royal family, aren't they? The king and queen of crops around the world. And the interesting thing, I think, where it works is that it's all about the way that we integrate with the global market. And it's one of those bits where it's kind of a key, I suppose, education point that we learn about how all these markets interact, because we're here talking about crops specifically, but especially on that deforestation and sustainable soy side of things, that impacts the beef side of what we do. It also impacts poultry markets significantly in terms of our competitiveness. So having engagement and being linked in with that network where we can have that bigger, wider view, not only do we get the information that is the direct data that we use on that very factual basis of looking at those financial business comparisons, having the ability to delve into that network to get that information then helps everything else that we do as well. And that's, I suppose, one of the points of what we do as economists is we have to look at the round of everything and understand everything that's going on, and from an analyst position look at all of the data and find our way through it. And this is one of the very, very valuable ways that we can do it. And looking forwards as well, I suppose, Laura, there's other ways that we can expand that data, isn't there? There's a huge amount of discussion around sort of scope 3 and emissions, etc. And this could be another area in terms of that data gathering where we're going to be getting more information in terms of what others are doing, whether they're competitors or partners around the world, and we can learn and develop from that as well.
Yeah, definitely. The Agri-benchmark Institute is super interested in sort of bringing together as many expertise and different projects from around the world, so we can all see benefit in different areas. So whether that's looking at carbon or regenerative farming practices, it's giving us an opportunity to compare how other countries are approaching different issues that are facing the agricultural sector. So it's really interesting having those different regional perspectives and attitudes, and hopefully trying to see a way forward for agriculture over the next few years.
So I suppose the question then to you both is, When's the next analysis of this data coming out? Sort of where are we in that cycle of information, etc., and how do levy payers listening to this engage with it with what we're producing?
So we just attended the most recent conference in June, which is where we kind of spoke about the harvest. Currently, those results are being finalised and processed, so it shouldn't be too long until we get a final copy of those results, and then we'll be able to do a bit more analysis like we did last year and put something out over the winter time. So yeah, definitely look out for those.
And what would be the main things that you guys have learned, I suppose, from your perspective, Laura? What's the main thing or the top thing that you've learned from being involved in this conference and with this data?
Oh, that's a hard one.
Put you on the spot.
It's always tricky, isn't it, to think back on something and try and pick one gem of piece of information out, because there's definitely so much going on both during the conference and within the results that's really useful. I think for me, looking at different countries' attitudes to regenerative practices and possibly hearing about how the Argentinian system is really taking up lots of regenerative farming practices, and those are becoming really popular, and just seeing the economics of how that's paying off for them is really interesting. And I think particularly as the UK is becoming more interested in regenerative practices, and we have a system that already lends itself quite well to some of those practices, it's going to be really interesting going forwards to keep comparing with those systems and seeing how our uptake compares to other countries.
I think that's a really important point, is areas like regen, how does that work around the world, and how can we apply, how can we learn from it? One of the big challenges we have is that we have this challenge of balance in our arable rotation, particularly since the demise of oilseed rape because of the threat of flea beetle, crop failure, and the fact that farmers are less willing. I was thinking about this when I was looking at a new lawnmower the other day, which was really sad, and how SFI, for instance, could help us improve that competitive position and delivering those public goods in the rotation, balancing the rotation, improving nutrient use efficiency for following wheat crops as well. And I think this is going to be a really useful tool to understand if we can do it, and how does it improve our competitiveness globally, if we can, and how does that then inform the value proposition for UK agriculture as a whole, as well as stacking up all of the direct commercial things as well.
Jack, are you trying to say then that the quality of your lawn is a public good?
Could do, couldn't I? I mean, water infiltration. There's some butterflies in there. There's some clover there. I could, as a delicate mix of forage legumes. I think that's in the SFI list. What
kind of area are we quoting here? What decimal place of an acre?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I'm more interested in how Laura and Olivia are going to overcome the challenge of finding a globalized definition of what regenerative agriculture is. I think that's probably going to be the biggest challenge. Right. Thank you, guys. Thank you for giving us that introduction to what the Agri-benchmark conference is and what the data is and what we produce with it. As ever, there is a load more information on our website. Try the Google search function on our website to search and find all the bits that you need for it. But thank you both for your time and sharing that with us today.
Thank you so much, guys, for having us.
So I understand why you want to turn the mystery words into a competition, Jack, because I think I did a really rubbish job of it today. And the only thing I could have done would have been to preface it with, and here's my mystery word, I think, to put it in there. And I didn't, I have no clue. I'm going to guess lawnmower, because you said lawnmower.
Absolutely. I was panicking towards the end and couldn't, how on earth do you do that? And I thought, I think when I was looking at a new lawnmower, that's when it came to me.
Was I right?
You got one.
I wasn't right. Oh.
You've broken your duck.
Yes. Could you guess what mine was?
I had half a suspicion it was royal family, but it was quite subtly done.
Well, I think you get half a mark for that. Oof. Because it wasn't royal family. It was queen. Just the single word, queen. I was trying to think of a way of getting karaoke in there and talking about Freddie Mercury, but I struggled. So I don't know which of corn and soybeans is the king and which is the queen of global crops, but I went with it.
Corn is king.
Corn is king, yeah. Up corn, down horn.
Oh, the epitome of the commodity cycle.
Thank you all for listening. Please do get in touch with us at Agonomics at ahdb.org.uk or any of AHDB's social channels. We would be more than happy to lend a hand with any problem that you've got, whether it be agricultural, economics or otherwise. We are there for you. Every episode drops midday on a Wednesday, and we look forward to delivering another Agonomics in the near future.